Hello there, my name is Artie, and way back in December 1996, a company called Macromedia released a program which would go on to be one of the most influential pieces of software on the internet, inadvertently giving rise to an era of internet media which was a massive part of mine, and I'm certain many of your, childhoods. Today, we're talking about Flash and what it did for the internet. So, like I said, Flash began way back in 1996 as Macromedia Flash 1.0. Well, technically it existed beforehand as Smart Sketch, then Future Splash, both products by Futurewave, but this company was ultimately bought out by Macromedia, who made a number of changes that I would argue began to define Flash. The most obvious change that Macromedia made was the name and logo, distilling Future Splash into Flash and changing the logo from this weird picture of crabs on a film reel to this iconic F in the circle. Throughout the next 9 years, up until 2005, Macromedia would continue to develop Flash, releasing a slew of new features with each version. Notable features included JavaScript plugin integration and PNG support in Flash 3, the release of ActionScript, Flash's programming language, in Flash 5, and the later release of ActionScript 2.0 in Flash 7. Flash 8, released in September 2005 with an improved logo, was Macromedia's last version of Flash before the company was bought out by Adobe Systems later in the year. Fun fact, actually, back when Flash was Future Splash in 1995, Futurewave approached Adobe with an offer to sell them the software, probably for a bit less than the $3.5 billion Adobe later bought it for. It took around 2 years for Adobe to get around to releasing Flash 9, now creatively renamed to Adobe Flash Professional CS3, but it was a fairly big update, introducing integration with Photoshop, another of Adobe's big software, alongside ActionScript 3 and a new, arguably much worse, logo, which was standardized with Adobe's other products. Later, in 2008, Adobe would release Adobe Flash Professional CS4, along with the first version of Adobe Integrated Runtime, which you might know as Adobe Air, which replaced the Flash player. Adobe would continue to update their version of Flash up until 2015, with the last version being Adobe Flash Professional CC 2015. Although it was the last major version, Adobe would continue to support it up until 2020, but we'll talk more about that later. For now, let's get into how Flash began to gain popularity on the internet, not as a software development tool, but as something a bit more fun. Thanks to Flash's easy accessibility, simplicity, and versatility, the program wasn't only used for its intended purpose, internet applications. In fact, way back in 1997, only a year after the initial release of Macromedia Flash, John Kricfalusi, creator of the Ren and Stimpy show, launched the Goddamn George Liquor program, which was the first cartoon series ever produced specifically for the internet, using Flash to create it, indirectly popularizing Flash as an animation tool. Let's backtrack a couple years though to 1995, where 17-year-old Tom Fulp launched a website called Newground Remix where he could host his projects. This website gained popularity in 1996 after the development of Fulp's games Club a Seal, a primitive Flash game where you clubbed seals, and Assassin, a series of HTML games where you would assassinate celebrities. In 1997, Fulp developed Club a Seal 2 and Assassin 2, but instead of putting them on his website Newground Remix, he made a new website called Newground Atomics for them, and continued to put a few other smaller games like Cat Dynamics and Beat Me Jesus on there. In 1999 though, Fulp realized how much web hosting was, and decided to merge his two websites, Newground Remix and Newground Atomics, into one singular domain, Newgrounds. In that same year, Fulp would develop one of the most influential pieces of internet media to date, Pico's School, an incredibly fun but juvenile game built in Flash which was insanely polished for the time, apparently hailed as the pinnacle of Flash 3 programming. Web games had existed before this, like the aforementioned Club a Seal, built mostly in JavaScript and occasionally using Flash for interactive animations. That said, nothing had ever come close to being as fleshed out as Pico's School. At this point, traffic to Fulp's website, Newgrounds, was absolutely booming, especially thanks to the success of Pico's School. For now, it was only hosting Fulp's projects, but that would soon change when site regulars decided to email him with their own Flash projects which had nowhere to go, and Newgrounds would begin to host and showcase many more games and animations from a variety of creators. This time, just around the year 2000, is when Flash really started to boom. By the end of 2008, Newgrounds had over 1.5 million users and featured thousands of Flash games and animations. Only a couple years later, in mid-2010, Newgrounds' user base had increased by another 700,000 users and 50,000 games and animations, and the site would only continue to grow from this point onwards, becoming the biggest hub of Flash games and animation on the internet. Thanks to the popularity of Newgrounds, a few other similar websites cropped up, hoping to get a piece of the Flash pie. Kongregate appeared in 2006 and featured a lot of idle clickers, most popularly Adventure Capitalist. Cool Math Games appeared in 1997 and gained a lot of popularity thanks to its name allowing it to be unblocked on school Wi-Fi, and Kizzy, my personal favourite, appeared in 2012 and featured a slew of games more aimed for preteens which had a bit more polish. These websites all dominated the internet for a long time, being home to an unimaginably large sum of stuff, all of which was available for free. There were loads of really notable games and animations you could find, so let's have a look at them. In no particular order, here are my personal top 10 Flash games and animations. The Madness series is an absolute classic, and perfectly encapsulates the weirdly and unnecessarily violent vibe of the internet back in the 2000s. Madness, if you haven't heard of it, basically consists of this one guy beating the living daylights out of everyone around him for no apparent reason. The first installment of the series released on July 25th, 2002, and the creator, Crinkles, has continued adding new animations and games since. Madness has been so influential that Newgrounds now celebrates Madness Day every year on September 22nd. Back in the height of Flash's popularity, around 2012, Disney outsourced development of a number of small Flash games for their shows and the like, including a number of games featuring characters from Gravity Falls, one of my favourite shows of all time. This one, Pine's Quest, was a small-scale RPG where you travel through the areas of Gravity Falls and fight the Summerween Trickster at the end. I remember really enjoying this, and I remember playing through it like a whole bunch of times. The Impossible Quiz was a series by Splap Me Do, where you try to answer a bunch of questions. Simple, right? Well, no. The questions were all as difficult as possible, involving complex puzzles with very obscure and occasionally nonsensical solutions. I remember trying to play this in school and always just ending up looking at the solutions online. Good game though. Developed by Flipline Studios, the Papa Louie games, or 5 million of them, involve managing a restaurant and fulfilling orders. Each installment of the series takes place in a different restaurant, ranging from a pizzeria to a hot doggeria to a pancakeria. My personal favourite was always Freezeria, probably because it was the first one I clicked on. Fireboy and Water Girl was a huge Flash game which allowed two players to control two characters, one on WASD and one on the arrow keys. I never really liked those games though, and I always preferred Money Movers, which used the same concept but had a bit more polish and, in my opinion, more interesting features. Unfortunately, I didn't actually play this with a friend much and usually just ended up playing by myself. Probably my favourite Flash game was a small point-and-click adventure called Back in Time, where you'd, travel back in time and get stuck there, meaning you need to escape. The gameplay was nothing too groundbreaking, with it literally just being a basic point-and-click game, but I've found myself really enjoying it for some reason, along with its sequel. I completed both games so many times that I could probably still do it first try today. Combining elements of Pico's School and Madness, the Riddle School series was another point-and-click game where you had to escape school. I already made a whole video on this game series, so be sure to check it out. After this video, of course. Easily one of the most influential Flash animations of all time, Lemon Demon's The Ultimate Showdown of Ultimate Destiny, animated by Sean Villiers, told the story of an ultimate showdown between a variety of pop culture characters and popularized animutation, essentially just setting images of pop culture icons to music. The song slaps as well and is one of the things that got me into Lemon Demon. Happy Wheels is the game almost solely responsible for popularising massive YouTubers like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye, and kickstarting the Let's Play content format we still see everywhere today. Another incredibly gory game that encapsulated this early era of the internet, Happy Wheels had you controlling a character on a bike or wheelchair or something, trying to navigate through a bunch of different levels. Minecraft Tower Defense was the most popular game amongst my friends at school. Like in every other tower defense game, you have to defend the path to your home, but unlike the others, you can dig your own path to your house, allowing for more strategy than most other TD games at the time. In class, we'd all play this and compare our high scores. From memory, I really sucked, and I was never able to get past the Nether. Those were my personal top 10, but there were, of course, heaps more amazing games and the like made with Flash. If you know any games that I didn't talk about here, be sure to leave them down in the comments, and I'll try to check them out. Anyway, as you can see, Flash games and animations were extremely popular back in the day, but it wasn't long before 2017 came about. The beginning of the end. On July 25th, 2017, Adobe made a detrimental announcement. On December 31st, 2020, they would be discontinuing support for Adobe Flash. After this date, the Flash player would stop receiving any support, distribution, or security updates, and the player would automatically disable itself past January 12th, 2021. To be honest, this wasn't as much of a shock horror as I've been making it out to be. HTML5 was beginning to gain popularity, and a lot of sites were beginning to favour that over Flash. On top of that, Adobe kept having issues with the mobile versions of the Flash player. In 2010, Steve Jobs himself wrote a letter to Adobe called Thoughts on Flash, where he detailed his many problems with the software, along with all the reasons why it wouldn't be permitted on iOS. Adobe tried to fight this by developing Adobe Air, and after a lengthy legal battle between Adobe and Apple, Adobe eventually won. That said, the damage had already been done, and in late 2011 the company began advising developers to use HTML5 instead. Around that time, Adobe also discontinued support for the Android version of Flash, stating that it was transitioning to Adobe Air and OpenFL. In 2015, Adobe began a rebrand of Flash Professional, renaming it to Adobe Animate and beginning to replace features of Flash with those of HTML5. Then, finally, in 2017, there was that detrimental announcement that Flash would have its end of life at the end of 2020. After the announcement, many people thought this would be the end of web gaming as a whole. Thankfully, this was very much not the case. Sites like Newgrounds began encouraging to submit games in a HTML5 format rather than Flash, and a number of Flash emulators emerged, like Newgrounds Player and Ruffle, the latter of which is far more popular nowadays. Of course, these emulators would only work on websites that actually bothered to implement them, meaning a heck of a lot of lesser-known licensed Flash games were due to go completely missing, games like Pine's Quest, which I mentioned earlier. This gave rise to Flash Archive projects, the most notable of which is Flashpoint Archive, formerly Blue Maxima's Flashpoint, which aimed to archive as many games as possible, including Pine's Quest and heaps of others. I've used it lots in the past, especially when I was making that Pop Tropica video back in 2022, as it let me play all of the old islands. Overall, Flash's EOL wasn't nearly as detrimental to the internet as anyone supposed, probably due in part to Adobe's 3-year warning, allowing people to have plenty of time to prepare. To say that Flash had a large impact on the internet wouldn't be doing it a morsel of justice. Not only did Flash bring about some of the biggest sites on the internet, sites like Newgrounds and Cool Math Games, it inadvertently kickstarted YouTube gaming through games like Happy Wheels, revolutionized web animation with the goddamn George Liquor program and the Ultimate Showdown of Ultimate Destiny, and gave a whole generation of kids something to do on the school computers in the back of the classroom. I know that I personally wouldn't have the love of video games I have today if not for Flash games, and I'm certain that applies for thousands of others around the world. The legacy of Flash still lives on today, mostly in places like Newgrounds and Flashpoint Archive, where you can still access hundreds of thousands of games and animations for free. Thank you all very much for watching, and listening to me waffle about Flash for however long this video ends up being. If you've enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you at some point in the future. Goodbye.